重音很重要吗？那是为什么呢？ Do you say perfect or perfect? 那重音到底如何要去念呢？今天的单元就让我们来为你解答。Hello， 欢迎来到 Executive Plus 主管与沟通力的 Podcast。I'm Sherry, an educator, certified coach, and style enthusiast. 我相信专业有效的沟通是语言跟逻辑的完美结合。
And I'm Nick, a startup consultant, corporate trainer, and late-night gaming junkie. I believe great communication requires the right mindset and solid frameworks.
我们希望带给大家职场英语的技能、跨文化沟通技巧与其他能帮助您成为出色领导者的工具。
Join us each week as we share our experience, research, and methodologies to take your communication and language skills from good to great. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Executive Plus podcast. This week, we want to talk about stresses in language. Now, over the past few weeks, I've been deep diving in a music education YouTube channel by a creator called Adam Neely. And he goes incredibly deep into the nuance and language and formation of music. And there was a video that really grabbed me and I sent to Sherry where he starts talking about stresses in language and music. And he uses a really interesting example where the James Brown song, I Feel Good, which I'm sure everyone has probably heard in the background. I feel good. When you look at the sound wave of I feel good, there's not a clear stress on which word. And so he just talks about both tonally through the voice and also musically what happens when that stress is not clear and how it kind of makes this really interesting sense of that song. And so it kind of grabbed me. I sent it to Sherry and we started deep diving a little bit on stress.
如果大家是音乐达人或者你对音乐非常有研究的话 I highly recommend his videos. I had to watch it 3 times to understand all the different aspects. But today we just want to talk about stresses and how important it is. And 我们在很多课程上面我们都会讲到这个重音有多么多么的重要，但是今天我们来跟大家讲一下为什么它那么的重要。
Now, stress seems like something it should be fairly easy to understand, fairly easy to grasp. But one thing that happens is English is a stress language, but Chinese is a tonal language. Which means is it's a complete flip in the way that you have trained your mouth and your tongue to handle speaking. And so while it seems theoretically very easy to grasp, actually doing it takes a lot of work, a lot of practice. And this is one of the major changes between sounding like a native speaker and sounding like a second language speaker.
所以有一点非常重要是我们要了解中文 Mandarin。Okay, 它是 tonal language. So I think everyone knows 我们 Mandarin 我们每一个字都有它不同的音调。那音调不同，它会改变这个字的意思，它就是变成是不同的字。So Vietnamese, Thai, Cantonese, and Mandarin 这4种语言也是所谓的 tonal language. 那不知道大家知不知道 Japanese 我们的日文其实是 pitch language, 所以它的 pitch 会改变它这一句话的意思跟它这个字的意思。So 刚刚 Nick 有提到，那英文到底是什么样的 language 呢？ It's stress. 所以了，当一个字它的 stress 是在它不同的音节上的时候，它这个字的意思就会改变。那如果它的 stress 在不同这个整句话不同的字上面的话，它这整句话的意思也会随着它改变。
Now, because English is a stress language, what actually happens is there are several layers towards how the stresses work. Now, Sherry and I are not professors. We're not going to give you a full lecture. I'm sure that you can find a book or something online talking about this in detail. But we quickly want to cover some of the key layers of how a stress language works and why, whether it's a word or whether it's a sentence, this can become quite complicated, and it does require practice and listening. So the most base layer that we're going to kind of build everything on is the fact that because English is a stress language, we actually build it around something called phonemic stress. And this means that different words will have stresses on the different syllables. And this is where it gets really confusing, but it also helps us indicate the separation between certain words. So for example, if I say insight versus insight, it actually helps me understand that the word insight, like an understanding into something, versus incite, which is to like actually cause an aggressive action or to like start something, like start a fight, to separate between these two words. And it's just something that you really have to pay attention to and memorize.
所以这也解释了很多人会问我们到底有没有一个规则啊，比如说文法有个规则，但是 stresses 这种重音有没有规则，我们什么时候要放在第一个音节，第二个音节 so on and so forth。 但是其实因为英文是在 phonetic stress， 英文啊 Russian, Italian, Portuguese and Spanish 这些语言的 stresses都没有一个规则，所以是必须要靠大家仔细的去听，还有习惯它，还有去记得它。
So this is just something, as Sherry said, that you have to pay attention to and memorize over time. A very basic word that most people look at to get a really good sense of this would be the word perfect. If I say perfect with my stress on the first syllable, this is actually the adjective.
Right.
Like, wow, you look perfect today. But if I put my stress on the second syllable, perfect, this is actually the verb form. Like, I would really like to perfect my writing style. And this is, again, what happens within a phonemic stress. Now, the examples that we've been giving you are actually also examples of what we call lexical stress or word stress, which means within a given word, we have a tendency to accent or to stress certain parts of that word.
所以这个也就是我们平常在所有的字里面单字里面我们都会有不同的音节，也有重音会在不一样的地方。 So the example here that we have is the word laboratory. So in the US we said laboratory, but in the UK we said laboratory.
Right. So this is again where it gets confusing because same language, English, but our stress switches based on the accent that we're using. And like Sherry said, for the US, we say laboratory. This is why we say the lab or lab rats. But for the UK, it's the laboratory. And the stress is on that second syllable. Same word, same meaning. Everyone knows what you're saying, but the stress switches. So this is, again, where stress patterns can get a little bit difficult. Now, the next layer, which we're actually going to jump into a little more, it's the real challenge to get into, which is how do you deal with stresses on a sentence level or a phrasal level?
And this is something that we continuously talk about, the importance of really be aware of the stresses, and we call this prosodic stress. Prosodic stress 也就是我们在讲一个句子里面你的哪一个字是你的重点，那我们就会把重音放在那个地方。 So for example, the song that Nick talked about in the very beginning of the episode.
So a very simple phrase by James Brown, I feel good. Now, this seems like it should be incredibly easy to understand.
Right.
But what makes a stress language a little bit difficult and nuanced is because depending on which word I stress, I can completely change the meaning of this sentence. And so this is what Adam Neely dives into, but it's an example that we wanted to give and maybe give you a few tips on how you can use stress to your advantage. Now, let's look at the baseline sentence. I feel good. Now, for most people, that would just mean like, if I ask the question, oh, how do you feel? Then, oh, I feel good.
I feel good.
Pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
But what happens if I change the stress of each word? It actually changes the meaning. It may answer a completely different question. So, for example, if I ask, who feels good?
I feel good.
Right. So the stress on that I becomes an answer to who, not how do you feel? If I say, how do you feel? What would you say?
I feel good.
Right. Just by changing the question or changing the stress, the focus of that sentence.
Yeah.
So from the I, who feel good, to I feel good. Feel being the stress actually is an answer to a different question. Or if I was like, do you feel okay?
I feel good.
Right. So now good becomes that
Right.
sentence, and my question may change. These are all very simple examples of stressing a different word. Now we want to share with you 2 really simple ways that you can use stress to your advantage and actually start practicing how to stress things differently. And those 2 ways to do it are long and short sounds and high and low sounds.
那什么是 long and short？ 也就是当我们有重音的部分，那个音节我们就要来用 long， 我就把那个音节把它拉长。那如果是我们刚刚所讲的嘛，有个 prosodic stress， 那一样那个字我们就把它整个拉长。So 我们刚刚用了 I feel good, right? If you wanted to emphasize on the I, you go I feel good. 你会发现这个 I 比较长一点。那如果是字呢 perfect，你在 per 的地方，我们就稍微拉长一点点，那它就会凸显它的这个重音的部分。
So there are easy ways to practice this. Like, for example, the sentence that Sherry just gave you. Again, if I was to differentiate how you feel versus how I feel, and we do this a lot maybe in an argument, be like, maybe you feel this way, but I feel good.
Exactly.
Like, I'm okay with this, right? So that length really emphasizes the personhood. Now, you'll also see something where it's like maybe someone got a massage and be like, ooh, how did it feel? And it'd be like, oh, it felt good. Right? It seems like an extreme, but by practicing these long and short, you really start to indicate like which of these words is just grabbing you. Be like, wow, she just looks beautiful, right? That really long, hard stress on the beautiful helps indicate what is my key sentence. And just kind of overacting these, like short and long, will start to give you a sense of how to do this.
Absolutely. 有一些书籍或有些老师他可能会教你要稍微大声一点呢，或者是音调提高一点，但是因为很多人会害怕这样会讲得不太自然，所以我还是建议大家在练习的时候，我们就用这种长，把它拉长这个音，我觉得是一个最好的方式。
Yeah, and you'll notice this a lot in acting. So if you ever watch actors, they overdo this. Practice that yourself.
Right.
So let's talk about the other side. The basically what we also refer to as pitch, like high pitch versus low pitch. And you get this a lot when you're talking about learning about how to ask a question.
Right.
That always that, you know,
The
rising intonation. But this is also when you're giving stress, high versus low will change the sentence. So if someone's like, who feels good? You know, you could say, I feel good. This is a statement. But if you're like, I feel good, right? That height actually turns it into I'm questioning whether I feel good. And then maybe it's questions like like maybe me. But if I'm like, I feel good.
Right. You're like questioning yourself. Right.
But then if I like do the good, like I'm questioning the good. Do I feel good? I feel bad. I'm not sure what I feel. I feel something.
Right. 所以这个 pitch 我觉得是在尤其是句子上面非常好运用，也很好玩。其实像刚刚 Nick 所讲的很多 example, play around with it and really don't be afraid to use this intonation or your pitch in the sentence to show the different meaning and different emotion. It really just let your emotion comes to life in the sentences.
And another way is kind of an advanced is the stress is not actually just on one word and one meaning.
Yeah.
Again, within a sentence, you can have multiple stresses.
Absolutely.
So I feel good. It could be like, I feel good. I'm mixing now the high, low, and also the long, short. And it's giving color, it's giving texture to my statement.
Right, absolutely. And 当我们句子当然变得比较长的时候，你会发现，我 比如说这个主词、这个受词或另外这个字都是我的重点，那当然他们也都可以变成你可以加上 stresses， 但是这个时候你就要去感受一下说我要怎么样 how do I play around with it with the long and short, how do I use intonation and stress to give it more color, just like what Nick said. And it does takes a little bit of practice, but it's super fun, and that it's going to make you sound very native.
Right. This ability to just, again, give color and texture to the language, usually even beyond, say, like high level versus low level vocabulary, is a strong indicator that someone is thinking in that language.
Yeah.
Because again, Chinese is a tonal language. So someone who sounds native, they really know how to nail those tones. Whereas English is a stress language. So the same as how are we evaluating your native speaking level is actually how are you giving color and texture through stress to a language.
对，很多学生常常问我们，我到底要怎么听起来很像 native speaker? This is the trick.This is the thing that everyone needs to start to practice. 当你这个 stress 放得对，或者是你真的能够运用这些 stress 跟 pitch 在你的句子当中 you really sound like a native speaker.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed our a little bit more academic but somewhat fun episode on stress. And we'll talk to you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.
The Executive Plus podcast is a Presentality Group production, produced and hosted by Sherry Fang and Nick Howard. You can search us on Facebook, 主管英文 Executive Plus. You can also find us on Instagram, Communication R&D, and email us at sherry@epstyleplus.com.